Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ben Rennick. Ben Rennick was born in August 1987 in Missouri. He grew up in a rural area with his family, including his older brother Sam, with whom he was very close. In 1989, the Rennick family moved to a picturesque farm. There, the two brothers enjoyed the outdoors, and it was during this time that Ben developed a passion for snakes. In September 1992, a tragic incident occurred for the Rennick family. While they were away, a gas leak caused an explosion that destroyed their beautiful home. As a result, the family was forced to move into a trailer. Later, Ben's mother, Kim, was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer. Despite the hardships they faced, the Rennick family remained united and supported each other through every challenge. After previous hardships, the family moved to a new house in 2002. Here, Ben was given a room to raise snakes. In 2009, after a long battle with cancer, Mrs. Kim passed away. Before she died, she asked her sons to promise to continue taking care of the farm and pass it on to the next generation. With an endless passion for snakes, Ben founded the company Rennick Reptiles, which quickly gained wide recognition. Thanks to this, he was able to export snakes to many countries around the world, from the UK to Japan. Snake breeding became his passion and purpose in life. He was known as an excellent breeder, dedicated to his work and more concerned with his love for snakes than profit. His reptile farm successfully bred and propagated many species of reptiles, from common species to some of the rarest in the world. The value of Ben's reptile collection was enormous. The snakes in his collection alone were estimated to be worth over $1 million. However, Ben felt lonely and wanted to have a family. In 2010, at a party, he met Lindley, and they quickly developed a relationship. Just a few weeks later, Ben introduced Lindley to his brother Sam and Sam's fiancé Eli. Both Eli and Lindley had children from previous relationships, which made it easy for them to connect and become friends. Lindley quickly integrated into the Rennick family and moved in with them. She helped Ben take care of the snake farm. They fell in love and lived like a real family, although they were not officially married. In March 2012, Lindley gave birth to a baby girl named Amelia. Ben was very happy to be a father. However, their happy family life once again encountered difficulties. Frank Rennick, Ben's father, faced serious business difficulties. Before that, he made several illegal stock trades to pay for Kim's medical and treatment expenses. The day before the FBI was scheduled to come to investigate the farm, Frank committed suicide. His death put an end to the investigation. Frank's sons once again faced the pain of losing a loved one. Ben inherited the house and farm, while Sam received a sum of money much larger than the value of the house. Although each had their own families, they lived together as one big family in their parents' house. Sam did not hesitate to use his inheritance to renovate the farm, demonstrating the bond and solidarity between the two brothers. Initially, the relationship between the two brothers was quite good. However, financial disagreements soon caused a rift. After their father passed away, Ben focused on his business and family. He decided to marry Lindley on April 14, 2014, officially making her a member of the Rennick family. Later, Lindley and Ben opened a new business together, Essentia Spa Incorporated. However, the business managed by Lindley encountered financial difficulties. Ben and Lindley often argued about financial issues. Although Lindley worked very hard, her income was still not enough to cover the salon's expenses. Meanwhile, Sam and his wife were also having financial difficulties. Ben allowed Sam and his wife to sell some of the furniture in their house to raise more money, but Lindley did not agree with this decision. This incident led to a conflict between the two families. causing serious damage to their relationship that could not be repaired. Ben decided to improve his family's finances by selling some rare reptiles at a high price. However, this plan failed due to a serious incident at the farm. On June 8, 2017, Lindley entered one of the warehouses and found Ben lying motionless in a pool of blood on the floor. Panicking, Lindley called her brother Sam and the emergency services for help. She reported that she had found her husband lying unconscious on the ground. During the conversation, Lindley dropped the phone and ran away. Sam continued the call and confirmed that his brother had passed away. He suspected that the cause of death could be a snake bite. The Montgomery County Sheriff was called to a snake farm for the first time in many years. Law enforcement officers were nervous about entering the farm, which housed more than 3,000 snakes. They were to examine a man lying in a pool of blood and were on guard against a possible attack by a venomous viper, which was initially believed to have caused the victim's death. When police investigator Dave Colbert arrived at the scene and examined it closely, he discovered a shell casing on a shelf at eye level. This discovery suggested that this was not a snake bite, as initially thought, but a more serious homicide. The shell casing was found near Ben's body, but no weapon was found. The killer had shot the victim multiple times in the back and head. Remarkably, no one in the family heard the gunshots or saw the attacker. Sam and Lindley were summoned to the sheriff's office for questioning. Lindley suspected Sam of being involved in her husband's death and provided a clear motive that Ben wanted to sell the house, but Sam was adamantly opposed. To clarify the matter, Sam was asked to take a lie detector test, which he successfully passed. The police released Lindley and Sam because there was not enough evidence to hold them. An investigation into the motive for Ben's murder was launched. Initially, the police suspected a robbery, but this theory was not confirmed, as all the rare snakes and valuables were still intact at the scene. Just a few days after Ben's death, the police questioned Lindley. They tested her hands and clothes for gunpowder, but the results were negative. After her husband's funeral, Lindley cut off contact with Sam and Eli. She sold her husband's company, inherited the house, and filed a $1 million life insurance claim on Ben. After receiving the insurance money, Lindley decided to sell the Rennick family home for $740,000. The Rennick family was told they would have to move. Sam began to suspect his brother's wife of being involved in Ben's death when he discovered that the insurance claim was settled quickly and the family business was sold shortly thereafter. Sam shared his suspicions with the investigating authorities. As a result, Lindley was brought in for further questioning. During the interrogation, Lindley admitted to having a complicated relationship with her husband, Ben. She also revealed that she occasionally met another man named Eric. However, Eric was ruled out as a suspect because he had an alibi. What was shocking was Lindley's confession that about 3 years after marrying Ben, she had been having affairs with at least 2 other men. Text messages between Ben and his wife showed that he suspected her of having an affair, causing tension in their relationship. On October 5, 2017, the Missouri Highway Patrol administered a lie detector test to Lindley, which she failed. However, due to a lack of concrete evidence in the case, she was released. Although progress has slowed, the investigation into Ben's death continues. A report of police reports shows, a month before Ben Rennick's death, Lindley made her first attempt to kill her husband. She fabricated a story about Ben being an abusive husband who regularly abused and beat her. Lindley told this story to a coworker at the spa, hoping to gain sympathy and support. Investigators discovered this after Ben died. Lindley Rennick and her accomplice conspired to kill Ben by mixing 15 Percocet pills into a protein shake. Ben drank the shake without realizing it, making him seriously ill for a while, but he eventually survived. Ben had no idea he had been poisoned. Investigators subsequently questioned Lindley 6 times about the incident. A surprising breakthrough in the investigation occurred on January 14, 2020, when a key piece of information was revealed from a state prison. A witness named Brandon Blackwell claimed to know about Ben's death. Brandon told Missouri State Highway Patrol investigators that Lindley was the one who shot Ben and that she had conspired with her ex-boyfriend. Brandon revealed that he and Lindley had been having an affair while she was still married to Ben. A year and a half after Ben's death, Brandon and Lindley had a child together. However, they broke up in 2019. Brandon claimed that Lindley had admitted to him that she had been having affairs, specifically with Ashley Shaw, a co-worker at the spa where she worked, and Michael Humphrey, another ex-boyfriend. Years after Ben's death, Lindley and her ex-lover Michael Humphrey were arrested in connection with Ben's death. However, after their arrests, both blamed each other. The question remains, who really killed Ben? According to Michael's testimony, on the day of the incident, he accompanied Lindley to the farm. Lindley asked Michael to pretend to be the buyer and wear gloves. Although initially assigned to shoot Ben, Michael failed to do so. In the end, Lindley took the gun and shot her husband to death. The investigation into Ben's death lasted 3 years. By January 16, 2020, authorities had issued arrest warrants for 3 suspects: Lindley, Michael Humphrey, and Ashley Shaw. Ashley was granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation in the case. She testified in court against her former employer. The former spa employee revealed that Lindley had been complaining about her husband and had convinced her to join in on the scheme. She told that Lindley claimed that Ben had been demeaning, insulting, and even physically abusive to Lindley. Fearing that she would lose custody of their children after the divorce, Lindley decided to get rid of her husband, Ben. She and Michael conspired to poison Ben with a lethal cocktail. When questioned, Lindley and Michael blamed each other for Ben's death. In October 2021, Michael Humphrey appeared in court in Ine County. His attorney hoped that revealing the murder weapon would reduce the charge to second-degree murder. Although Michael had the gun involved, no conclusive DNA evidence was found on it. To get his sentence reduced, Michael cooperated with prosecutors by revealing the location of the murder weapon. As a result, he was convicted of second-degree murder, a lesser charge. On January 3, 2021, no plea was entered, and Michael was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Lindley's trial began on December 6, 2021. She was charged with fatally shooting her husband, Ben, on June 8, 2017, at his snake farm in New Florence. According to court records, the plan to kill Ben began at Lindley's spa. According to the statement, Lindley may have made up the story about domestic violence because she feared that Ben would learn of her financial difficulties and take away her children. The first time Lindley attempted to kill Ben, she tried to spike his protein shake with narcotics. The trial detailed the day of Ben's murder, replaying the entire sequence of events through cross-examination. On the day of the murder, Michael picked up Lindley at the spa. Ashley also used Lindley's phone to send text messages from inside the spa, creating false evidence of their location and misleading the investigation. According to court records, Michael intended to kill Ben but asked Lindley to do it. After the shooting, Michael tried to collect all the shell casings but missed some in his haste. He then returned to the spa and threw away Lindley's clothes after she showered, in an attempt to remove gunpowder residue from her body and clothes from the day of the murder. Defense attorney Catherine Barrer asked Lindley to share her personal and family history, her education, her relationship with her ex-boyfriend Michael, as well as her work history and the events that led to her marriage to Ben. The lawyer presented Lindley as a victim of domestic violence. However, no evidence of such violence was found, which weakened this defense. Michael was part of a group accused of planning to kill Ben. Lindley described her relationship with Michael as complex and codependent, involving Michael's drug dealing and her drug addiction. According to witness testimony, Lindley ended her relationship with Michael in late 2010, but they reconnected about a month before Ben's death. Lindley denied the prosecution's allegations of planning to kill Ben, including trying to poison him with a protein shake laced with an addictive substance. In court, Lindley admitted to having affairs with several men and expressed deep remorse. When considering divorce, she did not know who to turn to for advice. As her father was divorced and held strong views on divorce and adultery, Lindley wanted support when talking to Ben, so she contacted her ex-boyfriends, which led to her reconnecting with Michael. During the trial, Lindley admitted to participating in her husband's death and concealing Michael's involvement. She said the reasons were marital problems, including arguments, allegations of abuse by Ben, and stress related to his snake business. Fearful of Ben's reaction to the divorce, Lindley brought Michael to the farm on June 8, 2017. She claimed that her intention was to file for divorce, not to harm Ben. Lindley said that she took Ben's trash to throw away, then went into the nursery and saw Michael and Ben washing their hands. She did not hear their conversation because she was focused on thinking about how to talk to Ben about the divorce. Lindley recounted in a trembling voice how Michael pulled out a gun and shot her husband. She screamed and ran outside, hearing several more gunshots. Shocked and panicked, she only remembers staring at the trees as Michael ran up and pushed her toward the car. When she returned to the snake farm, Lindley discovered Ben's body. She called Ben's brother, Sam, and they checked to see if Ben was still alive by checking his pulse and breathing. Lindley expressed regret for not telling the police right away that she was there with Michael and for not telling them what happened. Due to suspicions of her involvement in her husband's death, the $1 million life insurance policy Ben had purchased long ago could be contested. Lindley has waived her right to the money. Ben became the beneficiary of a trust fund after his father's death. The assets belonged to Ben and his children, not Lindley. However, Lindley received the money she contributed to the trust fund, along with her daughter's scholarship. Lindley admitted to seeking support by sharing her story with her then-boyfriend, Brandon Blackwell. However, the relationship ended shortly after Lindley gave birth to Brandon's child. At trial, Lindley expressed regret for repeatedly lying. "I was just trying to avoid the truth of what happened," she said, and insisted she never wanted her husband to die. Following the final verdict, Lindley's defense team did not file a motion for a new trial. No appeals have been filed against her conviction. However, Lindley filed a defamation lawsuit against Blackwell, claiming that his statements about her involvement in her husband's death were false. However, prosecutor Kevin Zellner questioned Lindley's testimony during cross-examination. He asked why she did not check on her husband after hearing the gunshots, why she did not call 911, why she sent friendly text messages to her husband and Michael after the shooting, and why she continued to lie even after emergency responders were involved. Prosecutor Kevin portrayed Lindley as a clumsy but ruthless mastermind in the murder. Lindley admitted to suggesting that police consider Ben's brother, the victim, as a suspect. During the trial, Kevin criticized Lindley's coldness in accusing the deceased's brother. During the sentencing hearing for second-degree murder and armed criminal action, Lindley broke down and cried but still did not admit her guilt. On December 9, 2021, Lindley, 33, was convicted of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 13 years in prison for the murder and an additional 3 years for the armed criminal action. In total, Judge Kevin Crane sentenced her to 16 years in prison the following January. Sam and Ben's family were furious about the sentence. They believe that both Michael and Lindley deserve life in prison, as they are as guilty as their co-defendants. Sam expressed deep disappointment and surprise when he realized that in Missouri, a human life is only valued at 13 years in prison. Ben was a promising young man. However, due to the actions of a woman, he and Sam fell into an awkward situation, causing irreparable damage to their relationship. Despite this, Ben continued to live a dignified life. He became famous for his talent in breeding snakes and even created a new species of snake named after him. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Rena Verk. Rena Verk had been born on March 10, 1983, in Saanich, British Columbia, Canada. Her family was of Indian origin, with her mother, Suman, having come from an Indian-Canadian family, and her father, Manjit, being an immigrant from India. Rena's parents had formerly been Hindus and had converted to Jehovah's religion. Rena struggled to fit in with her peers in the Saanich community, where Sikhism was popular among Indo-Canadians. Unfortunately, she was severely bullied at school due to her appearance and ethnic background, which set her apart from her predominantly white classmates. She was bullied due to her unusual appearance, being overweight and having brown skin. At home, Rena faced strict rules tied to her parents' religious beliefs, which were in stark contrast to her friends, who were starting to become independent. Her parents began to worry when they discovered her persistent bullying and feared it could negatively affect her mental health, potentially leading to depression. In May 1994, Rena's family moved to a new location, resulting in her transferring schools from Burnside Primary School. Her parents hoped this action would put an end to the bullying she initially experienced, and it seemed to be effective. Rena's mood improved, and she formed new friendships that brought her happiness. However, things took a turn for the worse when her new friends began to distance themselves from her, and the bullying began again. Rena graduated from elementary school in 1996 and began attending Coquitz Middle School. There, she met a new group of friends whom she considered cool kids. The group was famous for breaking the rules, drinking, and smoking, which represented the freedom that Rena desired, freedom from the strictness of her parents and their rules. Although she felt accepted by her new friends, her parents disapproved of her new relationships, leading Rena to become more rebellious. In 1996, when Rena was 13 years old, a friend suggested she leave home. The friend told her she could be adopted by telling the police that her parents had physically abused her. Rena took this advice and accused her parents of assault, but no charges were brought due to lack of evidence. Rena was taken away from her family and lived with her grandparents, who believed her story. However, things got worse when Rena falsely accused her father of sexually assaulting her, causing him extreme pain and suffering. In 1997, her father was arrested and sent to prison while awaiting trial for sexually assaulting Rena. Luckily, the charges against her father were dropped when Rena admitted that she had made up the entire story. Rena felt uncomfortable living with her grandparents, so she was placed in a foster home. There, she made friends and began imitating the behavior of those around her, including talking about gangs and even falsely claiming to be a member of one. However, Rena soon realized that living in a foster home was not as fun as she thought because she still had to follow rules and curfews. Finally, she apologized to her parents and returned home. However, her time with her parents had ended very quickly. Rena had left her parents' house again and stayed in a youth shelter. Over the next few months, she had bounced between her parents' home, foster care, and the youth shelter. This volatile situation reflected the challenges she had faced as a teenager trying to cope with her relationships with her parents, social workers, and government officials. Rena had yearned for acceptance and friendship, but her strict upbringing and overprotective parents had made her feel like an outcast among her peers. She had desperately wanted to fit in and had tried her best to gain their approval. Middle school had been the most confusing and emotionally challenging time of her life. Rena had sought recognition from those who had previously rejected her. Until she had received an invitation to a party on November 14, 1997, she had been delighted at the opportunity to interact with the popular kids. Rena's life had taken a turn during an overnight gathering with celebrities, which had initially taken place behind a school in Saanich. However, due to police intervention, the group had moved to Craigflower Bridge. The gathering had not gone as Rena had planned. At 10:40 p.m., just 20 minutes before curfew, Rena had called her parents to say she was coming home. Unfortunately, this would be the last time Rena's parents would hear from her. At Craigflower Bridge, a group of teenagers had drunk alcohol and smoked marijuana. Later, another group of girls from the Shoreline 6 gang had targeted Rena without warning. They had assaulted her, burned her forehead with a lit cigarette, and tried to burn her hair. The attack had continued until a girl had intervened and ordered the others to stop. Rena had tried to escape and go home after the initial attack, but two teenagers, Kelly and Warren, had chased her. They had dragged Rena to the other side of the Craigflower Bridge, where the attack on her had continued. Kelly and Warren had punched and kicked her, then held her head underwater until she died. After Rena's death, the attackers had taken off her sweater and shoes and rolled her body into the water. Meanwhile, Rena's parents had become increasingly worried when she did not return home before curfew. They had initially thought she might be at her grandparents' house or a group home, but she had not been at either location. A friend had revealed that Rena was still at the party when the friend had left around 11 p.m. The next day, Rena's family had reported her missing, but the police had responded slowly due to her past history of running away. Rumors had spread among students at the local middle school about a brutal beating and a body found in the nearby gorge waterway. The group of teens involved, known as the Shoreline 6, had remained silent about the incident. However, a witness had eventually come forward to police, saying she had seen Kelly and Warren following Rena after the beating. It had taken a week for police to begin investigating Rena's disappearance after her family had reported her missing. Although many witnesses and teachers had heard rumors about the incident, no one had reported it to the police. It wasn't until a student had come forward as a witness that the police got involved. On November 21, 1997, Warren and Kelly had been arrested and charged with murder and aggravated assault. The members of the Shoreline 6 had initially remained anonymous due to protection under Canada's Young Offenders Act, and they had faced serious assault charges. A police helicopter had been dispatched to the Craigflower Bridge area on November 22, but no evidence had been discovered until a thorough search had been conducted on the ground. This search had eventually discovered a body hidden in the weeds, later confirmed to be the missing person, Rena Verk. The forensic pathologist had concluded that Rena's death was due to drowning. However, an autopsy had shown that she had also suffered severe head injuries, which could have led to death. Rena had been only 14 years old when she had passed away. The 6 girls involved in the attack on Rena had initially been charged at the youth court in February 1998. To protect their identities, their names were not being made public. 3 of the girls had pleaded guilty to assault causing bodily harm, while the remaining 3 had been found guilty of the same offense after a trial. They had received sentences ranging from 60 days of conditional release to 1 year in prison. Rena's murder had led to the prosecution of 2 individuals, Kelly and Warren, who had been charged with her murder. Due to the severity of the crime, they had been tried in adult court despite being underage. Warren Glowatsky had had a difficult childhood. His mother had been absent for much of his life due to her struggles with alcoholism. At the time of Rena's murder, he had been living with a friend after his father had moved to California without him. Warren's trial had begun in April 1999, and he had been convicted of second-degree murder in June of the same year. As a result, he had received a life sentence. Warren had been eligible for parole after serving 7 years in prison because he had been a juvenile when the crime had occurred. During his time in prison, Warren had done things that could have had a positive impact on his decision to be paroled. This process had included measures such as meeting with Rena's family. In July 2006, Warren had been paroled from prison unescorted, and he had been finally fully released in June 2010. Rena's family had not opposed Warren's request for parole because they had believed he had shown genuine remorse for his actions. In contrast, Kelly Ard had come from a more stable family, one that had always supported her throughout the trial. She had been 15 years old when Rena had been murdered. Although her lawyer had requested that her case be heard in youth court, the Supreme Court of Canada had denied the request due to the violent nature of the crime and Kelly's apparent lack of remorse. Kelly had initially been convicted of second-degree murder in March 2000, but her conviction had been overturned in January 2003 due to an unfair trial. Pending appeal, Kelly had been released on bail after serving 18 months of her life sentence. However, during this time, she had been charged with assault causing bodily harm for attacking a 58-year-old woman in a Vancouver park. As a result, her bail had been revoked and she had been sent back to prison. In March 2004, Kelly had faced a new trial. Witnesses had testified that she had bragged about being responsible for Rena's death. Warren had claimed that he had seen Kelly drown Rena, but Kelly's lawyer had questioned Warren's credibility, pointing out inconsistencies in his initial statements to police and during the trial. Kelly Ard had testified during the trial that she had assaulted Rena to protect her friends because she had believed Rena would harm them. However, she had denied responsibility for Rena's death and instead had pointed to Warren and two other girls as the culprits. Despite the evidence, Kelly had shown no remorse and had offered no clear motive for the planned attack. When asked about her future, Kelly had appeared resigned, admitting that her life had been ruined and that she would likely be convicted. The jury had deliberated for 5 days before deadlocking, leading to a mistrial in July 2004. In February 2005, Kelly's second trial had taken place, with Warren again testifying as a key witness. He had repeated his earlier testimony, saying that he and Kelly had assaulted Rena, leaving her dead in the water. As a result, Kelly had been convicted of second-degree murder on April 12, 2005, and had received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole for 7 years. However, the British Columbia Court of Appeal had later overturned Kelly's conviction in September 2008. The court had ordered a retrial, citing the incorrect jury conviction in the previous trial. The decision had led to a fourth trial, allowing Kelly's case to be reconsidered in court. The Supreme Court of Canada had upheld Kelly's conviction for second-degree murder in June 2009, ending lengthy court proceedings. Years later, in 2017, Kelly was granted day parole, and in 2019, she received additional privileges, including overnight leave and extended day parole. The Parole Board of Canada's decision to continue her parole in July 2020 had attracted significant media attention. Kelly, who had initially received a life sentence, rebuilt her life on parole. She changed her name to Carrie Sim, got married, and had 2 children. She complied with the conditions of her parole, which included abstaining from the use of stimulants and avoiding contact with Rena's family. Despite the passage of time, the motives behind the teen's decision to attack and ultimately kill Rena remained unclear. One reason might have been revenge, as Rena had previously lived with the 2 girls involved in the assault. They had accused her of stealing phone books and spreading false rumors. Another girl claimed to have had a grudge against Rena for allegedly stealing her boyfriend in 2000. Rena's parents had sued the teens involved in her death, as had the British Columbia government and other parties. Rena's father explained that he wanted people to take responsibility for their actions, saying that society often failed to do so. Years later, in 2012, Rena's mother spoke out about her daughter's tragic death and the devastating effects of bullying on young people. She shared that dealing with the legal consequences of Rena's murder had left her deeply saddened. As the court cases progressed, she was finally fully feeling her loss. She was struggling more with her emotions and missed Rena even more. Rena's mother also expressed concern that bullying was becoming more severe and frequent rather than decreasing. She was shocked by the new ways young people were using technology, such as cyberbullying and texting, to harm their peers. These methods had not been available when Rena was killed, and her mother was devastated as the problem escalated. The murder of Rena Verk had led to a national debate about racism and bullying, especially among young girls. In the wake of Rena's death, Rena's parents took action to create positive change. They started anti-bullying campaigns and inclusion programs and worked with the government to implement anti-bullying measures in British Columbia schools. Rena's parents also shared their story with students, teachers, and law enforcement professionals to raise awareness about bullying. Their efforts paid off when the government introduced an anti-bullying program in schools across the province. In 2009, Rena's parents were recognized for their advocacy with the Anthony J. Hume Award of Excellence for their dedication to crime prevention and community safety. Rena Verk's life had been marked by hardships and challenges. Although she made some mistakes, it was understandable given the pressure to fit in. Despite Rena's mistakes and the false accusations against her family, her parents continued to love and support Rena unconditionally. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jessica Knott. Jessica Knott was born on June 22, 1986, in Allamont Springs, Florida. She grew up in a loving family with her parents, an older brother, and a younger sister. Her father worked in construction and often traveled to other states for work, so her mother mainly took care of her and her siblings. Throughout her childhood, Jessica was a cheerful and active girl who loved playing outdoors with her friends and siblings and had a special love for animals. On April 5, 1996, when Jessica was 9 years old, her family planned to visit her grandparents for Easter. While her mother packed for the trip, her father went to the store to buy some vacation items. Jessica asked her mother if she could go to the yard to wait for her father to return. Her mother agreed but told her to stay in the yard and not wander off. The family's apartment complex was located in a quiet area, surrounded by many trees and away from the main road. The neighborhood was considered safe, and children often played outside without regular adult supervision. However, when Jessica's father returned home around 6 p.m., he asked his wife where Jessica was, and she was surprised to learn that Jessica was not in the yard as she had thought. The parents searched the yard but couldn't find their daughter Jessica. Growing increasingly worried, they started asking neighbors if they had seen Jessica. A neighbor reported seeing Jessica sitting on a bench, reading a book, but this information yielded no results. As night began to fall and Jessica was still missing, her parents contacted the police. The police quickly began search operations, questioning neighbors and canvassing the surrounding area. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to find Jessica, forcing the police to expand their search to nearby streets. A few hours later, the police received an unexpected call from an unknown number. The caller's voice was distorted by background noise. But the police determined that Jessica might have been near a water pumping station several miles from her home. When the police arrived at the water pumping station, they witnessed a horrifying scene. Jessica's body was discovered near the pumping station, hidden in a black trash bag. This location was only a few meters from the road, but the pumping station was located under a bridge, making it nearly impossible to detect. Next to the body were some magazines and a children's mirror. The police quickly identified the victim as Jessica Knott and handed her body over to the medical examiner for further investigation. Investigators turned their attention to tracing the 911 call, which they believed was made by the killer. Their goal was to use the call to identify the killer. However, the call was made from a public phone at a nearby gas station, and when the police arrived, the perpetrator had already fled. Detectives tried to take fingerprints, but it was a difficult task because this was a public phone booth. which likely had many fingerprints from different users. In addition, it was possible that the killer had wiped the phone clean after calling or had worn gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. Further investigation revealed that Jessica may have been killed elsewhere and her body moved to the water pumping station. Evidence on the ground showed that the killer pulled the body out of the car, then put it in a trash bag and dragged it to the water pumping station. Jessica's clothes were still intact, except for a missing shoe, which was not found at the scene. The only potential clue at the crime scene was tire tracks on the ground. There was a possibility that they belonged to the killer's car, so the police took photos and analyzed the prints. Meanwhile, a medical examination of the body showed that the victim died from strangulation, with marks on the face and neck indicating the killer used bare hands. An autopsy showed that Jessica had eaten a hamburger shortly before her death. Her mother said she did not give Jessica a hamburger that day, suggesting the killer may have provided her with food. Additionally, forensic experts found no evidence of sexual assault, leaving the killer's motive unknown. Initially, police had suspected Jessica's parents of being involved in her disappearance because they had not had a solid alibi. Jessica's mother had claimed that she had packed up the apartment, and her father had claimed that he had been out shopping, so they clearly had had the opportunity to commit the crime. The police had been confused as to how the killer had been able to get Jessica out of the yard without anyone noticing or her screaming, leading them to believe that the killer might have been someone Jessica knew and trusted, and she might have voluntarily left with them. The killer's voice on the 911 call had provided another clue. In the recording, experts had detected feelings of grief and remorse, suggesting that the killer had truly felt remorse for his actions. The fact that the killer had taken the risk of calling 911 suggested that they might have been trying to minimize guilt or manipulate the investigation. However, the obvious sadness in the killer's voice had led investigators to believe that the killer had likely been remorseful for his actions. The investigation had reached a turning point when police had found a roll of black garbage bags in the trunk of Jessica's father's car, similar to the bag used to dispose of the victim's body. However, expert examination had shown that the bags had come from another manufacturer, eliminating Jessica's father as a suspect. The focus of the investigation had then turned to other suspects. Forensic experts had conducted a thorough examination of the victim's clothes and body, thereby obtaining many clues. One notable discovery had been that there had been a significant amount of dog hair on Jessica's clothes, even though her family had not owned dogs. This suggested that the dog hair might have come from the perpetrator's dog. Additionally, human hair of an unidentified man had been found on Jessica's body, and experts had been working to extract the DNA profile from the sample. However, this process had taken several days. Further examination had revealed two strange fibers on Jessica's clothes that experts had analyzed and determined likely had originated from car seat covers and carpets. This finding had supported the theory that Jessica had been killed at a location other than the water pumping station and then transported there by car. To determine the breed of dog that had shed hair on Jessica's clothes, experts had used the FBI's specialized database, which contained microscopic photos of hair from many different dog breeds. By comparing fur samples with a database, experts had determined that the fur had belonged to a Shar-Pei. This discovery had suggested that the perpetrator might have owned the Shar-Pei and that the dog's fur had been transferred to Jessica's clothes at the perpetrator's home or in the car. According to investigators' initial theory, the killer might have lured Jessica into his car, taken her to buy hamburgers at McDonald's, and then taken her to his home, where she had been murdered. To aid the investigation, experts had tried to improve the quality of the phone call recordings, but this had proved difficult. They had decided to try a different approach and sought help from NASA, which had advanced audio enhancement tools originally designed for use in space recordings. NASA had agreed to assist and provide police with higher quality audio. However, experts still needed to sample the suspect's voice to compare with the call recording. Detectives had suspected that the killer might have known Jessica, so they had played the call recording for her mother, hoping she could recognize the voice. At first, she had said the voice was familiar but couldn't place it. When she had heard it a second time, she suddenly had realized that the voice belonged to a neighbor who had lived in their complex. Although she couldn't remember his name, she had told detectives that he often had taken his Shar-Pei for walks in the yard. Police had quickly identified this man as James Crow, 35 years old. Hours after Jessica had disappeared, investigators had questioned her neighbors, including James Crow. James had told them that he had seen Jessica in her yard while walking his dog, Pumpkin, a Shar-Pei. They had exchanged a few words and then he had left. Detectives had looked into his past and had found no history of criminal activity. He used to be a truck driver, but had been currently unemployed and had spent most of his time walking around the neighborhood with his dog. Detectives realized that the similarity in voice and breed of dog had not been enough to arrest James, so they obtained a search warrant for James' car. Inside, they found two disturbing clues. Under the front passenger seat, they discovered an empty Happy Meal bag, which was suspicious because James had no children and Jessica had had a McDonald's hamburger in her stomach. Additionally, the car had had brand new tires that had barely been used, which James had claimed to have changed on the day Jessica was murdered. However, his previous tire had not been very old and could have lasted a few more years. Police investigated further and discovered that one of James' old tires had been left behind at an auto service. When they compared the tire tread pattern to prints found near Jessica's body, they did not match. However, it was possible that tire marks on the ground did not belong to the killer's car but to another vehicle. Police also searched James' apartment, where they found a box containing several rolls of trash bags similar in size and color to the one found on Jessica's body. To determine if there was any connection between the bags, detectives needed to find a way to prove that they had come from the same manufacturer. At first, this seemed impossible, as the bags had had no distinctive markings or features and there were hundreds of manufacturers of similar products. The detectives had had an idea to solve this problem. They contacted Roberts, a quality control specialist for the company that had manufactured the bags found in James' apartment. Roberts pinpointed the factory that had produced the bags based on a special code on the cardboard box containing the rolls. The code indicated that the product had come from a facility in Virginia. Roberts explained that a small amount of iron or titanium was added to the bag's composition, depending on its color. Because the factory produced bags in many different colors, the materials used in production changed constantly, causing the ratio of plastic and iron or titanium to change daily. To take advantage of this information, experts used high-intensity X-rays to measure the presence of iron and titanium in the plastic of handbags from the suspect's apartment and the crime scene. This analysis provided exact ratios of elements, which were identical in both bags. This suggested the bags had been made on the same day and possibly from the same batch. However, there was more to the story than that. During the production of garbage bags, microscopic debris accumulated on the machine and imprinted on the plastic sheets as they were rolled out. This created a unique stripe pattern on each bag, visible to the naked eye. Even though the debris on the conveyor belt was constantly changing, creating a new pattern every few hundred feet of fabric, the results were consistent enough to provide another possible lead in the investigation. The similarity of the bags suggested that not only had they been produced in the same batch, but they had also been produced within a short time frame, perhaps just a few hours apart. Comparison of the bags from the suspect's apartment and the crime scene revealed a striking match in the lines and patterns on the bags. On further inspection, experts showed that the bags had been rolled into bundles by machine, which could have created irregularities during the rolling process. Although these irregularities were hardly noticeable, they could be detected by examining the edges of the bag, where the folds formed a unique pattern. Upon re-examining the bags, experts discovered that the pattern on the bags at the suspect's apartment matched the pattern at the crime scene. Further analysis also revealed that fibers found on Jessica's clothing had matched the carpet in James' apartment and the upholstery of his car seat. An audio expert had also analyzed the 911 call recording and compared it to James's voice sample, concluding that the voice in the recording belonged to James. Although the evidence was only circumstantial, detectives still believed in James' involvement in the case and decided to arrest him. James was taken into custody, and the prosecution announced its intention to seek the death penalty. Despite James continuing to deny guilt, the case still went to trial. The prosecution presented its theories, highlighting James' frequent outdoor activities with his dog, which had earned him the trust of local children, including Jessica. According to police, James had met Jessica while walking his dog and had struck up a conversation. He offered to take her to McDonald's, and she agreed because she knew him. After the meal, James allegedly invited Jessica to his home while his wife was away. Evidence had shown that Jessica was actually at James's house that day, as fibers from his living room carpet were found on her clothes. The investigation revealed that James might have tried to attack Jessica, but something went wrong. Forensic evidence indicated that the killer had strangled Jessica with their bare hands and pressed their palms against her face, possibly to silence her if she tried to scream. Panicked, the killer then placed Jessica's body in a trash bag and transported it to their car without arousing suspicion from the neighbors. The killer dumped her body near a water station, called 911 from a nearby gas station, and returned home. During the preliminary hearings, James's attorneys attempted to defend the evidence, arguing that there was no concrete proof of James' guilt. Although the judge accepted the evidence, the defense pointed out that in murder cases, the standard of proof is higher and more direct. Therefore, the possibility that James could avoid the death penalty was very large. A plea agreement was offered to James based on the circumstances surrounding the case. The deal required him to plead guilty to second-degree murder and accept a sentence of 40 years in prison without parole, thereby avoiding the death penalty. 2 years after the murder, in the summer of 1998, James accepted the deal. Although he was not required to provide details about the crime, he said that one of the reasons he accepted the deal was to spare Jessica's family the torment of the trial. The prosecution believed James showed genuine remorse for his actions and used the 911 call as evidence. The purpose of the call was unclear, but it suggested James was trying to alleviate his guilt. However, Jessica's parents were not satisfied with this deal because they had hoped for the death penalty and wanted James to confess to the crime. Despite this, James remained silent about the details of his actions. James did not fully serve his sentence. He died in November 2011 at the age of 49 from health problems, taking with him details of his crimes and motives. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Fusako Sano. Nobuyuki was born on July 15, 1962, in the Japanese prefecture of Niigata. He grew up in a wealthy family. His family's business, related to passenger transportation, was very successful, thanks to his 62-year-old father. Nobuyuki was a late child, with 5 half-siblings from his father's previous marriage. However, he is not really close to them. As a result, he grew up to be a spoiled and demanding child who always expected to get his own way, immediately. Nobuyuki often becomes aggressive when his expectations are not met in a timely manner. One notable incident occurred. He threw a tantrum in a store, punching his mother when she refused to buy him another toy. Nobuyuki struggled to form relationships with his peers due to his complicated and sometimes unusual behavior. He was also self-conscious about his height, which often caused him to hunch over. This behavior caused his classmates to tease him and give him unflattering nicknames. Despite this, Nobuyuki's family resided in a luxurious 2-story European-style house, which featured a spacious room specifically designed for him. The boy was uncomfortable in the room, fidgeting and expressing fear of being alone. This behavior led his parents to take him to see a doctor. After an initial review, he was referred to a psychiatrist who diagnosed him with multiple disorders, a fear of the dark, a fear of germs and dirt, and a unique of autophobia, fear of loneliness, sociophobia, anxiety related to social interactions. Essentially, he feared both being alone and being around others. As a result, he became a loner in high school, never forming close relationships with classmates, and never having a girlfriend despite his attractive appearance. His peers avoided him, and he became an outcast. The only people he felt comfortable expressing his anger and frustration to were his elderly parents, who forgave him and tried to calm him down with gifts and money. As an adult, he struggled to hold down a job. He frequently got into conflicts with colleagues, neglected his responsibilities, and would often leave work in the middle of the day for no good reason, such as when it was raining and he felt sad. On one occasion, he intentionally hurt a female coworker, likely trying to get her attention out of sympathy. Although the incident was attributed to an accident, he was fired immediately. After being fired, Nobuyuki became unemployed and relied on his parents' financial support. Over time, he became increasingly reclusive, rarely leaving his room, and frequently clashed with his parents. Following a particularly intense quarrel, Nobuyuki started a fire in his home, nearly destroying the house and putting its occupants in harm's way. Nobuyuki was later admitted to a psychiatric clinic for treatment, where he was diagnosed with a depressive disorder, uncontrollable outbursts of aggression, and signs of misogyny, extreme dislike and hatred of women. After a little over a month of treatment, he was discharged, deemed not to pose an immediate threat to others. For a brief period, Nobuyuki remained calm and even began rebuilding the partially burned house, adding a couple of new rooms. However, his efforts were short-lived, and he eventually abandoned the construction project. Nobuyuki became increasingly withdrawn and isolated. He spent most of his time in his room, watching TV. He not only forbade his parents from entering his room, but also the second floor of the house. If they tried to cross this boundary, he would violently lash out at them, punching and threatening to kill them. In the spring of 1989, Nobuyuki began taking walks, but he preferred to stroll near a local school where he could secretly watch the female students. At first, he kept his distance and tried not to communicate with anyone. However, one day, he suddenly grabbed a young girl, who was only 9 years old, and threw her over his shoulder as she was leaving the school gate. He then ran to his car, which was parked nearby. The other children immediately screamed for help, and a school security guard and bystanders quickly intervened, rescuing Shi and detaining Nobuyuki until the police arrived. Nobuyuki was unable to explain why he attacked Shi, and it was clear that he had intended to commit a violent and unlawful act against a minor. As a result, he was charged with attempting to commit a violent crime against a child. Nobuyuki Sato avoided a long prison sentence thanks to his father's connections and wealth. In August, Nobuyuki was given a year's probation despite his heinous crime. Shortly thereafter, his name was mysteriously removed from the criminal prosecution database, allegedly due to his father's intervention. However, Nobuyuki's father died shortly after his son's case, dying of a heart attack. Nobuyuki was left with overwhelming shame and guilt for his father's sacrifices and efforts to cover up his crime. After the failure of his first kidnapping attempt, Nobuyuki, 28 years old, tried again a year and a half later. This time, he carefully planned the crime and remained under the police radar for an extended period. On November 13, 1990, Nobuyuki set out on a hunting trip around the city. In the evening, as darkness fell, he spotted 9-year-old Fusako Sano, who had stayed late after school due to a sports event, walking alone on a deserted road. Nobuyuki quickly pulled over in front of her, got out of the car with a knife, and grabbed Fusako. He threatened to slit her throat if she tried to scream or run away. Then, he forced her into the trunk of the car. After driving for a while, he turned into a vacant lot, where he tied Fusako's hands and feet and covered her mouth with tape. When night fell, Nobuyuki drove to his house and took Fusako out of the trunk. Nobuyuki led her through a part of the house that was still under construction to his room, trying not to be seen. He then left the room and re-entered through the front door, as if everything was normal. Once upstairs, Nobuyuki again threatened Fusako with the knife, ordering her to be quiet. He tied her to the bed and warned her that if she tried to leave the room, look out the window, scream, or cry, he would kill her and dispose of her body in the ocean, where no one would ever find it. Fusako was terrified and obeyed the kidnapper's orders, hoping that he would eventually take pity on her and let her go. When Fusako didn't return home from school, her parents started to worry. They knew she had stayed late to watch a baseball game, but as the sun began to set, they expected her to be home by then. Initially, Fusako's parents tried to find their daughter on their own, retracing her usual route from school to home, but their efforts were unsuccessful. As night drew closer, the parents of Fusako turned to the police for help, hoping for a quick resolution. Since Fusako's disappearance, only a few hours had passed, and they were anxious to find her. The police launched a search operation. And by the next morning, they were joined by dozens of volunteers from the local community. The following day, the search party grew to over 200 people, who combed the area, distributed flyers with Fusako's photo, and interviewed passers-by in search of witnesses. Notably, Nobuyuki lived close to Fusako's school and the police station. He had previously attempted to kidnap Fusako, which had brought him to the attention of the police. However, despite this, Nobuyuki was not considered a suspect in the case, thanks to the efforts of his late father. A large-scale search operation was initiated to locate Fusako Sano, a Japanese schoolgirl who had disappeared. The search lasted for many months, covering numerous locations such as empty buildings, houses, railroad cars, and vacant lots. Investigators also searched suspicious vehicles and combed through interstate highways, but found no clues. As the investigation continued, authorities considered various theories, including the possibility of involvement by North Korean special services. However, despite their efforts, the search was unsuccessful, and Fusako remained missing. Fusako later revealed that she was terrified during her captivity and followed Nobuyuki's instructions in the hope that he would eventually release her. However, her captor, Nobuyuki, had no intention of letting her go. For several months, he kept her bound with tight restraints that impaired her blood flow and caused her to lose sensation in her limbs. If she disobeyed or made a sound, he would punish her with a stun gun, beat her, or threaten her with a knife. Notably, Nobuyuki never assaulted Fusako in a sexual manner during her captivity. Instead, he treated her more like a possession or a pet, using her as a means of companionship and conversation. Nobuyuki kept Fusako captive, feeding her a meager diet of food prepared by his mother. As a result, Fusako became severely malnourished and weakened. He restricted her to her bed, forcing her to use plastic bags as a toilet, which he would then dispose of in an unfinished part of the house. Once a month, he would bathe her in a basin, cut her hair and nails, and dress her in his own worn-out clothes. Despite her compliance, Nobuyuki would regularly beat her for his own amusement. Over time, Fusako's spirit was broken, and she became submissive, no longer attempting to escape or even look out the window. As the years passed, Nobuyuki stopped bothering to physically restrain Fusako, and didn't even think to lock the door when he stepped out. He would simply cover her with blankets or towels. Occasionally, he would turn on the radio or watch TV with her, but only to programs that interested him, such as Scottish or sports matches. He also brought her comic books, which he enjoyed himself. These were the only things Fusako had to read during her confinement. For nearly a decade, Fusako was isolated, never speaking to anyone else or leaving her room. She remained in bed most of the time, hardly moving or trying to resist her situation. Fusako had become so resigned to her fate that she no longer attempted to escape or call for help. Nobuyuki's mother lived in fear of her son's violence. For years, she had avoided the second-floor room because Nobuyuki had threatened her with violence. This was not an idle warning, as Nobuyuki actually pushed her down the stairs when she tried to enter the room. She retired in 1996 at the age of 73, and her circumstances became extremely difficult. Nobuyuki regularly abused her, forcing her to follow his rules. Desperate for help, she went to the police in the spring of 1996 and filed a report, stating that she was a victim of domestic violence at the hands of her son. However, the police seemed reluctant to intervene and persuaded her to withdraw her statement, advising her to handle the situation on her own. She also sought help from a public health center, complaining about her son's aggressive behavior and requesting that he be hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. Her concerns were ignored and she was told her son's actions were not worth worrying about. Instead, she was advised to encourage him to seek help voluntarily. In January 2000, the elderly woman, exhausted from years of physical and emotional abuse, made a desperate call for help. She contacted the hospital and the police, requesting that they send a medical team and officers to her home. Her reason for calling was that her son, Nobuyuki, had brutally beaten her again, tied her up, and used a taser on her multiple times. Authorities finally responded to she's pleas for help and arrived at her house. When the ambulance and police car appeared, Nobuyuki became visibly agitated, aggressive, and resistant. He had to be restrained with handcuffs and sedated with a large dose of medication. Nobuyuki's mother confessed to the authorities that she lived in fear of her son, whose behavior had become increasingly aggressive and uncontrollable. She also revealed that she had not been allowed to access the second floor of her home for years, as Nobuyuki had forbidden it, threatening to kill her if she disobeyed. Upon entering the second floor and Nobuyuki's room, the police made a shocking discovery. A pile of blankets on the bed moved slightly, and when the officers peeled them back, they found a thin, pale, and exhausted girl hiding underneath. When questioned, she identified herself and revealed that she had been kidnapped by Nobuyuki while walking home from school a long time ago. After the discovery, the police brought Nobuyuki's mother into the room to ask if she knew the captive girl. However, she was shocked and claimed she had no idea that anyone else lived in the house besides her and her son. The kidnapped girl also claimed that she had never seen she before. During questioning, Nobuyuki made a shocking confession. He recalled the day he saw Fusako on the road and thought she was cute, so he decided to take her home with him. According to Nobuyuki, he took care of Fusako, feeding her, washing her, dressing her, and reading her comic books. He only punished her when she disobeyed him. Nobuyuki also admitted that he loved Fusako like a friend and believed she felt the same way about him. He had no intention of letting her go and hoped she would stay with him forever. He enjoyed spending time with her, talking to her for hours about soccer, music, or his favorite comic book characters, and she would listen silently. Nobuyuki claimed that he never locked his bedroom door, but Fusako never tried to escape, which led him to believe that she was happy living with him. A medical examination concluded that despite his mental disorder, Nobuyuki was able to understand his actions and thus was eligible to stand trial. However, questions were raised about whether his mother could be held accountable as an accomplice. She often bought feminine hygiene products for her son, which raised suspicions. Despite her repeated efforts to alert authorities and get medical help for her family, her concerns were consistently disregarded. The case drew widespread attention before the trial even began, the city police facing heavy criticism. Nobuyuki had previously been prosecuted for attempting to kidnap a schoolgirl. But he had managed to avoid suspicion when he carried out his plan. As a result, the local police chief and the head of the regional police department were removed from their posts for failing to control the situation from the start and making numerous mistakes. Nobuyuki Sato went on trial in May 2000. The prosecution thoroughly examined every detail of his actions, including minor offenses. Nobuyuki was found guilty and sentenced to 14 years in prison, the maximum term. He was released in the spring of 2015 after serving his sentence. By then, his mother had passed away in a nursing home, and Nobuyuki had no other relatives. He was found dead about a year and a half later, in early 2017, in a small rented room. The cause of his death was not disclosed. When Fusako was discovered, she was extremely weak and could barely stand. Doctors diagnosed her with exhaustion, dehydration, and muscle atrophy. She also stuttered, was afraid of sunlight, and had lost most of her communication skills. Her parents didn't even recognize their daughter when they saw her after nearly a decade. It took Fusako about a year to recover physically, but her mental health took much longer to heal. She suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder and became withdrawn, avoiding people. Her intelligence was also affected, remaining at the level of a 9-10-years-old child. Her parents took her out of town, changed her name to Sachiko Yamada, and refused to speak to the press. Over time, Sachiko made friends, took up photography, and even passed her driver's license test. In 2007, a family outing took a devastating turn when her father accidentally drowned in a pond she tragically witnessed.